Hi, my name is Joe Jackson. I'm a journalist, author, interviewer, broadcaster, and now podcaster. This week, and by the way, I'm making this podcast on November the 5th, 2023, there's been a lot of talk about the Beatles' last single, Now and Then. John Lennon has always been my favourite Beatle since I was a child, and it is bittersweet to hear a new, inverted commas, Lennon song fleshed out by the remaining members of the Beatles and Giles Martin, the son of their original producer, George Martin. Indeed, back in 1993, when the podcast you're about to hear was recorded, Giles Martin sat in on the interview. Unfortunately, and this is just my opinion, the song Now and Then is not anywhere near the best of the Beatles, and it has a lyric that is decidedly underdeveloped, especially by Lennon's standards. But while we're speaking about the best of the Beatles, I also see that the Red and Blue albums, first released in 1973 on vinyl and 20 years later on CD, have been remastered and expanded. This idea made me smile, simply because back in 1993, I started off my interview with George Martin, which was meant to focus only on the CD release of the Red and Blue albums, by raising the question of why they were so expensive and split into two double CD sets, when one CD, for example, contained roughly 30 minutes of music. This led to George Martin telling me something I'd never heard before, namely that the Beatles got a raw deal from EMI and from George Martin at the start of their career, and that when their contract came up for renewal, they had the record company buy, as George Martin cutely calls it, the short and curlies, and they insisted on higher royalty rates. Maybe that's why the Blue and Red albums are split into the sequence of songs they contain, although I could be wrong. But that said, somehow right now, I hear in the back of my mind the Beatles singing the song Money, with its line, "That's what I want." And why wouldn't they? If you want to read the full George Martin interview, which was published in the Irish Times, I'll soon upload it onto my website, joejacksoninterviewer.com. Also, this podcast is what I call one in my series of singles because it runs for roughly 5 minutes. Later today, I'll upload my third George Martin podcast this weekend, during which he tells the story of the Beatles' final albums, Abbey Road and Let It Be. And so I shall. Enjoy.
I want to get the controversial question out of the way first. The problem about the cost of the album is that we saw the Sunday Times there quoting "Money can't buy me love," and yet saying there's an exorbitant price on the double albums each, which could have been put on one. What's your response to that?
I don't even know what the price is.
It's £50 for two, and they say they could have put it onto two single CDs. And because of royalty rates, the remaining Beatles are asking for it has to be £50.
It's £50 for 4 CDs.
Yeah, but they're saying at the time of them all, they could have been, two doubles could have been put on one. You know what I mean? Two single CDs could have been put on one CD.
I think what they're talking about is the actual content, isn't it? I mean, if you had a CD that could take 5 hours, for example, right, would you expect to sell it for the same price for one that only did 30 minutes?
Well, they're saying, yeah, that the CD only lasts, one of the CDs runs for 30 minutes and the two of them run together at 55 or something, could easily be put onto CDs.
Whatever EMI charge for it, it's nothing to do with me.
But has it not? Because I see you used to get £15 a session in the beginning, did you? Was that, I saw that quoted somewhere, you got £15 an original session. Is that right? I saw that in an old article.
Oh no, I never got paid in the original sessions at all, because I was a regular paid member employee. I had a salary of the magnificent sum of £3,000 a year.
Right.
But I didn't get paid anything.
Right.
What I did get paid, well, your £15 you may be thinking about, is when I did an arrangement for Yesterday, which was a string quartet arrangement.
Oh, right.
And I got paid £15 for that.
Would that carry across to when you recomposed Strawberry Fields and worked on those? Would they be seen as kind of arrangements, salaries and fees for that? No? That was just you were an employee of EMI.
An arrangement is something you write.
Right.
And if I wrote a score for, actually I did write a score for Strawberry Fields, so I would have got paid for that, but it would have been 10 or 15 pounds.
Right. So I mean, do you basically do well out of this deal? These being sold now, or
no, I don't.
You don't,
because I don't get any royalties.
Oh, do you not?
No.
Right. Okay. Do you think that's fair?
No.
Right. Okay, but there's nothing you can do about it.
Well.
Okay. No, I didn't realise that.
No, I never have had royalties.
Right.
You see, I used to work for EMI until 1965. And then when we started our own company, I put we actually get a small royalty for the company from that time, and it went into the company. So the company has enjoyed it, but I haven't.
Okay. So this question of all the money now is going to the remaining Beatles and their associated companies. All the profits on this. The profits from the new set are going to the Beatles and associated companies.
Yes,
remaining Beatles.
They get artist royalties, of course, don't they?
Right,
Yeah.
right. Well, that's what the Sunday Times argued, that they had put their percentage of the royalties so high that it had to be £50. That's the argument. However true that is, but it doesn't involve you, because I thought you also might have been part of that
I'm
network.
not part of that. But
okay,
let's take that particular argument.
Okay.
I think that the Beatles had a very raw deal from me and from EMI in the first stage. The first contract I gave them, because they were nothing, I gave them a penny royalty on each title.
Oh, was it? Right, okay.
And it was the old penny.
Right.
Not the new penny.
Okay. I thought it was a fifth of a penny. I've misread that.
There were 240 of those to the pound.
Okay.
So they got one of those for every double-sided single record they made, which they divided amongst each of the four of them, actually each of the five of them, because Brian Epstein took a fifth.
Right, okay.
And if they made an album, then you multiply that penny by the number of double sides you had. So if you had an album of 14 sides, which was the first album, please me, they actually got 7 on that.
Right.
7 whole pennies.
Okay.
Which is 7% of a pound.
All right.
No, it's not. No, it's less than that. Sorry, 240th of a pound, because it was the old penny.
Okay.
So it's a pretty mean deal. But then EMI always was pretty mean. And in those days, I thought, from their point of view, they were very glad to get it.
Sure.
It's like someone doing a television show for nothing because they get publicity. And from their point of view, they wanted to have a record deal.
Right.
They didn't care how little they got, as long as they got a deal.
Right. Okay.
And then once they got that, and they were successful, I suggested we double that royalty. But my bosses, DM, I didn't think it was a good idea.
When did they get successful then in those terms? 65, 66?
Only 63.
63, when Please Me was a hit.
Well, once we got it, by the middle of 63, I suggested we double it. The bosses said, we don't have to, you've got them for 4 years, which I had.
All right.
So they didn't do anything about it. And then when the Beatles contract expired, the Beatles said, well, stuff you for a lot, mate. We're going to have good royalties, or else you can... So they had them by the short and curlies.
Right. Okay.
And so the Beatles have always said, we're going to have maximum royalties. So they push EMI to the very maximum. Now, to say that the reason these albums are expensive is because the Beatles demand high royalties is, to me, putting the cart before the horse.
Right, okay.
The royalties the Beatles have insisted on proportion of the amount. You know, if the records are sold for £5, they get their maximum proportion.
Right.
EMI say, well, we're such poor people, we have to put it up.
Hi, Joe Jackson here again. I thank you for listening to this edition of the Joe Jackson Interviews podcast. And don't forget, if you want to read some of my articles, check out my website, joejacksoninterviewer.com.